So Latin 2 yesterday, and I know for me it was yesterday. I don't know when you're watching these, so maybe it wasn't yesterday. But for me, yesterday, I told you about comparative adjectives, right? And those are adjectives where you're basically adding er or more to them, such that, at least in English anyway, such that you can use them to compare, right? And I also said that it was part one of a conversation that was going to have at least one other part to it, probably two. Because the second part of that conversation is another kind of adjective that's similar to comparatives, but a little bit different. It's the superlative adjective, right? And again, these are not super complicated things, right? We're talking about, like this over here. Same examples I gave yesterday, but where the comparative of happy is happier, the superlative is happiest, right? So er to est, or more in most, right? Whereas, you have attractive if something is comparatively so, then it is more attractive. And if it's superlatively so, it's most attractive. I mean, basically, you're just adding, est. If it's a short, simple adjective, you're adding most if it's a more complicated one. It's usually, in English, it's usually just the number of syllables. In Latin, you don't have to worry about that. In Latin, it's actually always going to form the same way. And by always, I mean, well, ish always. What you do in Latin is you add an isimus. The musicians in the room will already know this because you already have those wonderful little notes, for, forte and fortissimo, piano, pianissimo. But yeah, it comes from this. It comes from this phenomenon in Latin where you have whatever stem that your adjective is, whatever the adjective actually means, basically you're just adding a whole bunch of extra syllables in the middle if you need it to be the most of that thing. So if you actually wanted to say happiest, you would take your adjective happy, laetasaum, and it becomes laetissimus, all right? If you were to take a third declension word, which I gave you this example yesterday as well, iners inertis, well, you take the stem inertis and you make it inertissimus. Hey. I also used this one yesterday because, kind of as an extension of attractive, this means like, pretty or beautiful or attractive. Although I will say there is something of an exception here. You actually don't say pulchrissimus, which is what you would think it would be. For these adjectives where the E drops out before the R, very oftentimes it'll just end up doubling the R, so you end up with pulcharimus. But honestly, I don't think that's that big of a problem because I feel like pulcharimus looks enough like inertissimus or laetissimus that you guys are going to be fine. And similarly, there's a lot of adjectives that end in L, or rather the stem ends in L, like facilis, which means easy. And very oftentimes, instead of getting facilissimus, you'll just get facilimus. But that doesn't happen with all adjectives. It just happens with some real common ones. So yeah, if you don't see the double L, then it would just be the isimus like it would be with anything else. Now, what I don't have here is I don't have the added. That was just for simplicity's sake on my part. But you'll notice they did all end in isimus or erimus or illimus. So they are all first and second declension adjectives. That is to say, if they're feminine, it's a. If it's neuter, it's and you can change it to whatever case you want it to be. I did fill in a table for this, but I only did the masculine. I didn't do the table for laetissima or laetissimum. And again, that was just for simplicity's sake. They take up a lot of room on the board because there's a lot of extra syllables here. And also, it's just the usa adjective endings. I didn't really want to fill them all out again because I feel like you guys know the usa adjective endings pretty well. But if I'm wrong about that, if I'm wrong and you don't know your usa adjective endings, go back and watch my video on adjectives, all right? Not trying to get the extra view counts. I just need you to know your adjectives. So if you don't know those endings, go back and watch the video on those endings. And otherwise, you're literally just taking the stem and adding isimus to show that it is extra of that thing. All right? So if you want to actually see it in a sentence, here's a great sentence. Real similar to the one from yesterday. I didn't even rewrite the whole sentence. I just rewrote part of it. But here, instead of comparing Luke, my cat, to some other cat, like his sister Leia, for instance, I'm instead saying now that Luke is the longest of all the cats. All right? I'm not comparing him to any one other cat. I'm comparing him to all the cats and saying that he is literally the longest. This is not true. He's kind of long, but he's not the longest cat ever. But in this sentence, he is. That's what this sentence says. He is the longest of all the cats. All right. Now you don't need any special like cases in here to do this. Since we're not comparing to something else directly, you don't have to worry about, whether that thing is in the same case or in a different case. He's just the longest of all the cats. Now that said, you might still see quam, right? This sentence down here looks pretty similar, right? I've got Luke still as my subject, but I have slightly different words here. And there's a quam in here. The quam does have a special meaning with the superlative. This sentence says Luke has a tail as long as possible. The quam longissimum basically adds a fourth meaning to your list of things that quam can mean. When you use quam plus a superlative, it means as much as possible, as blank as possible. It depends what adjective you're using, but in this case, this sentence claims that Luke has as long a tail as can be. So I do apologize about that. You have a fourth meaning for quam. Again, like I said, keep a spot in your notes for problematic words that have a lot of different meanings, because quam is one of them. All right? So heads up about that. But those are both instances in which the superlative is being used very literally as a superlative. Before I go, though, I do want to point out one other thing that I also pointed out in the comparative video, which is sometimes the comparative and superlative aren't used to literally end in ER or EST in Latin, or the equivalents of ER and EST. Sometimes they're just used to show degree. And so some of the examples were saying things in the comparative video like Luke is rather long, rather than saying he's literally longer. And in the same way, you can use the superlative, and the Romans very often do this, to say that something is very something, where it's not literally the most of that, but it is extremely so. So like in this example, it says, my friend told me the die longissimo about a very long day. It's possible that with a sentence like this, you might interpret this as the longest day, but without any context for knowing that it literally would be the longest day ever, they probably don't mean literally the longest day ever. They probably just mean that it's very long, all right? So when you're reading a sentence and you have a superlative in it, if it makes sense to go ahead and put an EST on it or say most, then by all means do so. But if it really just means very whatever, then do that. Because that's so often what we actually see in text, particularly in our textbooks. The Ecce Romani books use this kind of superlative a lot. In fact, they actually used it, I don't know if you remember, they actually used it back in Latin 1, even though they're only just now teaching it as a topic during Latin 2, but they often gave you vocab words that were technically superlative adjectives or adverbs or whatever. Oh wait, did I just say superlative adverbs? Oh, I didn't address that in that video. Well, you know what? Now you know what part 3 of this conversation is going to be about. It's going to be about adverbs. So I'll come back tomorrow probably, or the next day, and do a video on that as well, so we can have this idea fully fleshed out and the conversation finished. But for now, you know basically what comparative and superlative adjectives are, okay? And you know what they're going to look like, and you know to watch out for quam, because quam might work with them, and the couple of things it can mean when it does. If you've already forgotten what I said about any of those things, go back and watch again. I will see you guys in a day or two.